I just
Here we
got
go.
done teaching today too. So it's been, and then Kelly, I saw you last week. It's been a busy few days. It's kind of crazy.
So what John is saying, everyone, he's worn out and exhausted because he saw me in person last week.
You did fine. You know, I was dragging everyone around the corner. It's like, well, this place doesn't open for 20 minutes. Let's walk laps around the entire block in San Francisco. Now, my question, did the homeless people start moving into the Moscone Center the next day?
They did.
Yep. So that happens real fast down there. So.
Oh, and we're live.
And we are live.
We are.
We're live.
I managed not to do any like hot take Twitter moments at RSA because honestly, I didn't feel like there was anything incredibly new other than AI. And I was trying, Kelly and I were walking around and we were talking to vendors and I was trying to be nice, but there were some vendors like, I can't remember what vendor it was and I won't say who it was, but I was sitting there talking to him. Kelly's like sitting right next to me and they're talking about, oh, what we do is we go into your environment. We can able to query all the different configurations from absolutely everything to find all the different problems where things may exist. And she's like, it's just SNMP, isn't it? And I'm like, well, how do you guys actually query this information? Well, we actually just need credentials so we can read only. And she's like, it's SNMP. But they had a great booth. It was like a arcade and all kinds of stuff, but you couldn't tell what the hell they did at all. So.
It was a very busy RSA, and we saw lots of booths advertising AI, and we saw a lot of slogans that made no sense. We couldn't figure out actually what their product was.
That's because the AI wrote the slogan.
Yeah.
There you go.
We need like
I don't know.
a Letterman's top 10 best slogans from RSA.
Oh, there was nothing that was valuable at RSA. Like as far as slogans, I think there was one, Kelly, that was like leveraging synergistic AI for single pane of glass.
Paradigm shifting.
Like you saw a lot of that.
I don't know.
They were all, maybe all the slogans were written by AI. That's the problem.
You know what? Don't go there because frankly, marketing people are usually on a lot of drugs, sometimes the right kind, but usually not. Because I mean, come on, look at the commercials. You don't need AI. You don't need AI to have nonsensical marketing stuff.
Gibberish. You're on codeine and Percocet? Those drugs are awful. Can I introduce you to shrooms and LSD?
You got to microdose those. That's what
you got to microdose those. You got to pace yourself.
Make a note here, friends. Browen is
about
defending
quantity,
AI.
But like in quantity of total drugs, not in quantity of dosage.
Not defending
That's a good point.
AI. I'm just saying don't blame it for human stupidity.
Yeah.
AI may have generated the nonsensical stuff through hallucinations, but a human made the decision to put it on a banner.
That is a good point. AI is just a great big plagiarism engine. Whatever it does, somebody did first. So, this is a bad idea. Hopefully,
good. Let's duplicate it.
AI is like, yes. Oh, here we go. Alex put something in. Powered by world-class AI with proprietary language model, our product offers unbelievably agile, next-generation, threat intelligent, risk-based management. It's moving in a dark net on quantum containerized. Oh, there was a dark net vendor. I don't remember who they were, but they were like, we monitor the dark web for everything, and we go to hacker forums. And I'm like, oh, Jesus.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Was it you or me that asked them, like, how does this integrate to the rest of your security stack? And they couldn't answer it, Kelly. There was like,
it was you, John.
Was it me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was trying to be nice. And after a while, Kelly and Jason were like, you are coming across snarky. We can tell that you're holding back. And that's good. But you need to get pulled off the floor now. Also, if you're going to put goddamn cookies at your booth, make the cookies effing awesome. Like, we're walking around trying to find the cookies at RSA, right? And we're looking, and by the way, cookies come into the news stories today. and just couldn't find any cookies at all. And then we finally found them, and they're little dinky ass. Bring up the crooked finger, Ryan. This rant has got to end. God damn it! You good cookies, people. Jesus Christ.
For real, bring it up.
Yes, bring up the
Please.
finger.
Here we go.
Bring up the cookies. Hi, everybody.
Mild-mannered John Strand.
I got past the cookie anger at RSA. I'm coming back to that, by the way. But instead, we're going to talk about Zscaler. We're going to talk about the Ministry of Defense getting hacked. We're going to talk about how hackers are targeting children of executives. We're going to talk about Okta, the FBI, and of course, healthcare systems being knocked offline by attacks. But before we do, I can't let it go. Look, if you're going to give cookies, number 2, most importantly, you've got to have ice cold effing milk at your booth with your cookies.
That's unsanitary. That is so unsanitary. They just have like 1 cup of milk.
No, we've done it at our conferences. It said, come to the dark side. We have cookies. And it was like a big ice container with milk in it. If it works for baristas, it can. All right, we got to get to it.
Okay, here's a weird thing to think about. I feel like if it's a small container of milk, it's weird if it's just vanilla, like regular milk. It has to be like something else. It has to be chocolate milk, or I don't know. It's weird.
I don't care if you're serving cookies. You got to have milk, and the cookies have got to be awesome. Just rules, damn it.
Or even just Girl Scout cookies. I mean, they're not awesome.
Cookies.
They're not awesome anymore, but
they're still really respectable cookies, right? So, all right, Corey, can you pick a story?
Let's talk about Zscaler.
Let's go into it. Was this the security vendor that everyone at BHIS was talking about? There was a security vendor that's compromised. And, so there was a bunch of people like, I hope it's Optiv, which I thought was a bit weird, but that was too on the nose. But was Zscaler?
Well, they did say it was one of the largest, and then they were like, okay. So basically, to give the full story, there was a person who's kind of a notorious person on breach forums that posted to the forum, which is a hacker forum, which I'm sure all those vendors are indexing, and basically said, hey, I have access to one of the largest security companies, and you can buy it from me for $20,000. And also, here's the things I have. And it was just a list of like very nebulous things like, oh, I have customer list, or I had it wasn't like it didn't go into details on the specific things that the threat actor was selling, but long story short, it kind of blew up after that. It hit the rumor mill, and the rumor mill just exploded as you'd expect. The user also in the chat on that website was like, people were asking like, what company is it? And he was like, well, it starts with the letter Z and the revenue is $1.8 billion. So then everyone's like, $1.8 billion plus the letter Z. It has to be Zscaler.
Yeah.
And then after that, some employee who's, I guess, shall remain nameless, we don't really know if they're actually an employee or who they are, posted to Mastodon and said, stop being mean to my employer. There's no breach here. It's nothing. And then Zscaler posted shortly saying, we are investigating a breach. So that employee was maybe a little bit premature.
Hey, and props to them for good corporate spirit, because
we were talking about it in the pre-show, but it was funny because Alex mentioned, this is a new backdoors and breaches scenario of a insider threat, but like HR edition or like
an insider idiot.
It's like I will go public with details, even though none of the details are confirmed. Also, why would I go defend my company online? Like, it's just such a weird angle. It's like, did the person think they're going to get promoted from this? Like, hey boss, look what I did. Like, no matter what, going public with this kind of details is going to get you fired. Even if you're trying to be positive, it's not a good move to be like, hi, I don't speak for the company at all, but we're blameless. We haven't done anything wrong. And then the actual company, like, I don't know, a few hours later posted and said, hey, we're investigating a breach. Then it expanded from there, and they essentially, I don't think there's any like hard details yet, but it sounds like it was a test environment. Like my guess is it's a dangling AWS droplet or something like that they had set up with some insecure. I think the guy said it was some web framework exploit or something like that. So it's like, who knows how. Basically, it did end up being a very minor breach, and I guess Alex probably has more details.
Yeah, go for it, Alex.
Yeah, I looked into it, quite a bit, and I mean, I followed along with that little like guessing game, and then the evidence that the adversary was posting wasn't even really great evidence, or
no,
they posted like the thing that was completely blurred, and it's like, well, can you unblur it? And it's like, well, no, because I don't want to get sued, and it's like,
wait a minute,
you don't want to get sued. This whole thing, and this whole thing, test environment, they're like, well, test environment, but it has these. And where I'm kind of like, I think with following the employee that's making posts, I can see where he gets a little bit upset, because both himself and a lot of others looking at it are going, wait a minute, did Intel brokers trip over a honeypot and want to sell like all this honeypot creds for $20K and not really make it clear that it's a honeypot? And that's what, there's that's mentioned in all of these posts, where if this employee were rogue, you would think somebody would shut him down by now. But it's sort of like, we're doing exhaustive investigations because you do your due diligence, but it says, we strongly believe this environment was intended as a honey trap. So
was or wasn't?
Was intended. Was indeed intended as a honey trap. They say they may, the employee says, we may call it a misconfiguration, or we may just outright admit it was a honey trap because we don't want to reveal our methods.
Why would they do that though? Like, okay, so revealing the methods, but I just so happen to be teaching this class this week on cyber deception. One of the best things about cyber deception when you're dealing with attackers is if attackers know that there's cyber deception at your environment.
Yeah.
And the reason why is it gets the attackers to constantly start second guessing everything that they touch. And everything looks like a trap and nothing looks like it's real. And most of the times attackers ain't got time for that crap. They're just going to go someplace else. So I find it weird that they're not actively saying, yep, it was cyber deception. These attackers tripped all over it. Sucks to be them. Carry on. Like, unless it wasn't, right? Unless they're trying to put that out there as seed of discontent and there was legit data on the server and they want that rumor to start. So we start talking about it in terms as though it is a honey trap. I don't know. I think that they should be announcing it because that's a win, right?
Yeah, I would agree. I doubt it was a honey trap.
The adversary wasn't getting a lot of traction on this either. So then they kind of did we didn't get enough traction on this. So, hey, we breached Europol and the FBI, and you're going to, at some point you'll believe us that we actually breached something, right? Right.
Please believe me. Please, God.
I mean, we know from so many breaches that real hackers appear to mostly trade in the currency of street cred. And so this is like a move to try to get street cred, and then it backfired. I mean, I guess amongst hackers, it's maybe still gets a little bit of street cred because it's arguably from the perspective of me trying to simulate this kind of stuff, finding an exposed cloud asset that the customer doesn't necessarily control or know about, compromising it. That's great. It might not have access to, all the production databases and everything, but it's still valuable as a, potential launch point. I mean, we know from Microsoft, test environments aren't always test environments.
True.
Right? Like there's always a risk. Although, we'll talk, I'm sure, later about right now, Zscaler is just reiterating continuously that there's no compromise, there's no impact, there's no customer production, anything like that. They're just kind of continuously reiterating that. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's one of those things. The rumor mill really ran with it, and yeah, I don't know.
But as soon as you say an infosec company was compromised, everyone is panicking. So I got the attention. Now, my question is, this kind of ties back to the RSA conversation that we were having a little while ago. Now, years ago, when I was in this type of thing a little bit more in the weeds, instead of just doing PowerPoint presentations and spiky hair management things, if you were on these forums, like you said, cred is what mattered. And a lot of times, even to get access to these forums, you had to demonstrate some level of like utility. You had to actually bring something that was compromised to get in. And I wanted to ask you, Corey, and anybody else that may know, like all these vendors that are like, we're in like the hacker forums and we're monitoring everything that they're doing and we're scraping what they're releasing. And I kind of feel like that's bullshit. And I wanted to get your take on that. And is because people were talking about this stuff 12, 13 years ago. The one that I was talking to, it felt like absolute garbage to me. Like, so what do you think, Corey? Are these companies like coming with some creds to make it look like they're legit to get in, or is it just garbage that they're scraping from places that really don't provide that much value?
Yeah, I would say that, and I'm curious on Alex's take on this too, but the only one that I've really seen that had any value from my perspective was Flare. And the only reason it has value, I guess I would loop dark web monitoring in with every other OSINT tool, which is or intelligence tool in general, which is having the data is worthless. The only useful part about it is whether you can make it searchable in a useful way, right? Like, you were talking about, well, let's say you have a product that monitors the dark web for someone mentioning your company. Well, what do? Just put a firewall rule in place to block the whole internet if someone talks about you on a hacker forum? Like, you can't do that. It makes no sense. You like just getting intel briefings every day that says, hey, hackers are talking about you on the dark web. Like, fun fact, Black Hills Information Security. If you go on breach forums, you search for Black Hills Information Security, people are like, hey, check out this blog post. Like, people are talking about us. This doesn't mean we're being targeted by evil, adversaries with, tons of resources are just dying to get in, which we totally are. But those two things are not correlated, right? So I guess I would say vendors that are doing it, that's great. But the key is always to make it useful to the person who wants that data, right? Like if you're Zscaler and you had access, and it said, oh, like I don't think, it probably wouldn't have picked up something of this level of like targeted. Like you had to connect multiple different things. The post didn't say, Zscaler. It didn't. There was no. If you did a keyword search for that, it wouldn't come up. So I guess I mean, basically, it's useful if you can search it and build it into your incident response, like. But if you're just like getting a briefing every day in a PDF that says Iranian hackers are targeting PLCs, it's like,
thanks.
Okay, I thank you. I would have assumed they were doing that anyway. But Alex, what do you think?
No, I agree. There are a lot that monitor the dark web, and you're right that a lot of it they and this is one of my like personal views is that a lot of things call themselves like OSINT tools or dark web intelligence tools, and it's really just like open source data scraping or dark web data scraping. You need to distill it into intelligence, but then you're running a little bit behind the game. And a lot of the credible companies didn't have anything on Zscaler right away because they were still processing that into intelligence, and saying, well, right now it's all rumor. Right now we don't know anything. Sure, we can be one of those companies that drop something on the internet that's unfounded because you want to be first and you want to have everybody notice your name, or you can take a little bit of time and distill it into intelligence. So you have that balance of, well, do I want to be first or do I want to be accurate? And unfortunately, there's benefits to oftentimes being first.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think automation, where at least with most OSINT things, getting to the root of an investigation is kind of like, I don't know why you would spend a ton of money on a vendor to do this, because you're going to trigger your incident response, like retainers. You're going to call in forensic. Like, you're not going to be like, oh, well, the dark web monitoring tool said it was clean, so we're just going to ignore this breach that someone disclosed. Like, no, you're not. You're going to do a full investigation manually. You're going to have a reputable cybersecurity company go through all the logs, go through all the access. Like, you're going to run the incident down either way. So having a tool that searches the dark web, I mean, I guess it could help you maybe get in front of the incident a little bit. If someone's saying, I'm selling access to your company, but for most people, I guess that would be like a number 57 on your top cybersecurity things you should do, right? Like, it's, I guess, useful, but not like, not like everyone needs this, or like, it's always more important to not have a test system out on the internet that could be compromised than it is to know when the dark web finds out about it. But
yeah. All right, let's pick another story. What do we got here, folks?
I got one. So
go for it.
my whole thing is, we were talking about how Zscaler has continuously reiterated that no customer data was impacted, no production environments were impacted. What they should have done is initially say that, and then what they'll do, just like Okta, cough, cough,
Oh, we're coming back to that.
they'll slowly, that's where we're going. All you got to do is initially say no customer data was impacted. Only 1% of our customers are impacted. Then once everyone's tweeting about Zscaler, then you slowly, quietly say, oh, by the way, it was actually 100%, and sorry, and also, it was actually not. It was production data,
and it was a nation state adversary that did it. So
yeah, so that's what we're dealing with here. Yes, that's the story, Ryan. It's basically how this, we kind of covered the Okta stuff from the very beginning when it came out, and it kind of has gotten progressively worse. Similar to LastPass, we've seen this trend a few times where breaches are initially disclosed. Companies really are kind of conservative, I guess, with their estimation of the data leakage, and then end up slowly saying, hey, actually, never mind. It was worse than we had originally guessed. And people just don't care or pay attention.
Okay, Corey, in fairness, how much of that is because of lawyers preventing news from getting out, and how much of it is that, okay, now we know there's a problem, and as they dig deeper, they find more badness?
No, it's actually planned. I can jump in on this one. Working with some of these breaches, like if you work with law firms or you work with PR firms that are used to this, like this is exactly what they tell you to do, right? And Target is probably the absolute best example of this. And maybe, I don't know, Equifax, but let's start with Target. If you remember this Target breach, I can't remember what the initial disclosure was. It was like 10 million records, right? And then it slowly ramped up to where it was just astronomical. Equifax, sit on that breach until a hurricane is just pummeling Houston, and then we're going to release it. Like there are absolutely conversations that are happening where they're like, what's the best way to release this data publicly and get it out there? And the easiest way is to either sit on it until something bad happens, or exactly like Corey said, we're going to go through and we're going to release a small number, and we're going to keep raising that number up until we get to the more accurate number. And it's weird how the conversations happen. It's like, are we sure it's 100% of all the records? And it's like, well, yeah, we're pretty sure it's 100% of all. I mean, are you positive? I mean, just because they touched the file doesn't necessarily mean they pulled everything down, does it? And you almost feel like it's the Sideshow Bob Simpsons episode where they're getting Homer into the witness relocation program, where they're stepping on his foot, where they really want you to say something that'll give them some wiggle room, where they can say, at this particular point, we're unsure of exactly how many records have been breached. And they really, really hate certainty at the beginning of an incident. So yes, it is absolutely planned out for many of these firms, the way that they release this data out, like little bit by little bit. So the other thing that I like about this article, Ryan, if we could put it back up, this is a masterclass. Like this security chief, like what's his name? Where's the name? Just absolutely a masterclass. David Bradbury. Just like some things about this article that are just phenomenal. Like whenever I'm reading it, I'm like, this guy is smooth. The first thing is the first thing that he does that I think he does really, really well. And this is a masterclass for anyone that's dealing with an incident and wants to go to the news and seem like you're being open about it. The first thing that he does is he basically tries to paint the breach in the context of, quote unquote, the last 12 months and how we're seeing a shift, right? So this isn't something that they did wrong per se. This is just a shift in the industry and how the attackers are changing the way that they're coming after identity, right? Because with Okta talking about their attack, if it becomes identity, it's something new. It's something that attackers, they're doing brand new techniques, even though all the techniques that he talks about in this interview are techniques that we've been using for a really, really long time. If you can paint it as something new and novel, then it makes it less like you screwed up and more like this is something brand new and none of us were ready for it. So that's number one. Number two is he brings up other organizations' incidents. The only thing that's like hyperlinked in this entire post is incidents to other company or incidents of other companies. So there's the Microsoft incident. He talks about that, and it's
He gives a sentence to his breach and then
Yeah,
a
it gives a
paragraph to
sentence.
Microsoft.
Paragraph to Microsoft. Then he drops down and then he talks about DNA and all this stuff. And then he's going to talk about Cisco and their breach. And really just an absolutely class, just well done interview to kind of minimize the context as far as responsibility from Okta and trying to broaden it to the like bigger picture of what's happening in the industry, and then trying to spread what's going on by name dropping other breaches. So it looks as though it is absolutely a completely new thing. And oh, look, this is happening to these other companies. It's not just us. Just absolutely well done, sir. Very impressed with it as well.
I mean, I'm mostly just glad that someone with the word chief in their job title can describe these kinds of attacks, because we pen testers and security people for years have been kind of parroting the same information about session data theft, whether it's from Stealer malware or whether it's from like adversary in the middle tools or whatever. We've been talking about this for years, right? Like, I in like when did Sharp Chrome come out? 2018 or something? Like we're almost coming up on, this technique being 10 years old. And so like seeing chiefs and other high level people, talking about, hey, this is actually, a thing that we're seeing as an industry trend. Like, yes, from a technical, from our, curmudgeonly graybeard perspective, it's like, yeah, this is great PR. This is, this is why he gets paid the big bucks. But at the same time, I'm just glad other chief executives or whoever reading this or watching the interview or whatever will be like, so that pen test finding from 2 years ago, maybe we should actually fix that. Like, maybe we should, with continuous pen testing we do for every one of our customers, but maybe we should try targeting our help desk team with social engineering attacks on a regular basis and revise our policies. I think Okta just happens to be right in the middle of a tough situation similar to EDR, where it's like you have to provide convenience for the users. And multiple customers, by the way, we've reported a finding called Okta Infinite Session Timeout.
Yeah.
Which there's a setting in Okta where you could basically have a page, as long as the user keeps interacting with the page, aka refreshing it, it will just keep the session valid. You can set that to infinite, right? Or like, it's tough because Okta's job is not only to secure users' data, but it's also to provide, convenience to users so they never have to log in more than once to their every tool. So I don't know. That's my take. But
I also wanted to point out that he keeps at the beginning, he's talking about, this is on the front of mind of CISOs and this is what's driving CISOs. And I don't know, I'm a little bit salty. Maybe it's the cookies, but the vast majority of CISOs are not leaders. They are not visionaries. Like, one of the key natures of being a CISO in information security is being a reactionary. And you could take that as a dig against most CISOs or not. I don't care either way. But what I mean by that is I don't see a lot of CISOs that are like, how can we push the envelope? How do we make sure, like you were talking about, like infinite timeout on session identifiers? 99% of CISOs would absolutely have no idea what that is. And unless it led to a direct breach, they ain't got time for that. They just don't. They're just not going to deal with it. They're dealing with incidents. They're dealing with things that are popping on the scene right now. And very rarely are they actually getting proactive in dealing with it. And my overall point on that is, if anybody says these are the things that CISOs are talking about, feel safe to ignore that, because more than likely it is not cutting edge. More than likely it is 10 years old techniques that are being used that they just now are finding out because another organization was compromised. Like I said, just very salty. Salted caramel cookies sound good right now. I don't know, but seriously, that is something that I read in this article. And anytime I read in an article, it's like, well, top CISOs are discussing. Who gives a crap? Like, they're not really the cutting edge people that we're dealing with. A lot of times with our tests, we have to spend a good amount of time with many of the CISOs trying to explain to them how the attack actually works. Now, we're lucky. I think that a lot of the customers, because our customers are fantastic at BHIS, they're usually on the pointy end of the spear. You know, we don't have outbound sales calls. We don't have advertisements in airports and things like that, where we're advertising like, you know, zero false positive guarantee or bullshit that these people tend to resonate with. But, you know, talking to a lot of these people at these conferences when I'm walking around and they're like, well, I'm a CISO of X, Y, and Z. And I start talking with them. I'm like, you shouldn't be a CISO of anything. So I do think it's getting better, but I do also think that just the nature of that job is ultimately a reactionary job. And that could be the fault of the CISOs, but it also could just be the way the game is played right now. They are constantly reacting.
So, John, I'd like to respond to that.
Please do.
I hear what you're saying about them understanding technology. I don't know if that's necessarily their job responsibility. I think their job responsibility is to manage risk. Now, with that being said, to manage risk, they have to understand where threats are coming in and what kind of risk it actually is. But I believe CISOs also wear a business hat. So part of their job is to understand how the business makes its money and to manage cyber and technology risks in light of the organization making money. It's not just a pure technology view. And let me hear what you have to say about that.
Okay. So the definition of risk is what? Like if you take, there's a whole bunch of different components of it, but if we're dealing with what's necessary and what's sufficient, for the definition of risk, you need to have two things. And the two things basically are you have threats and you have vulnerabilities. I can have threats, and if those threats are not exposed in a way that vulnerabilities can be touched by those threat actors, my risk is low, right? If there's overlap where I have threats and vulnerabilities that can come in contact with each other, like a vulnerability in Okta or a vulnerability in my web server, a vulnerability where threat actors can interact with that vulnerability, then I have a high risk. Now, I also understand all the business part of it, but if we're boiling down the definition of risk to its core definition, it's threat times vulnerability equals risk. Where threats can interact with vulnerabilities, I have risks. And I would argue that you cannot be a CISO and you cannot manage risk if you don't understand threats and you don't understand vulnerabilities, because at their core, it's where those two things interact with each other. So that's kind of my take on it. And like Corey was saying, I love it whenever CISOs like hairs stand up on the back of my neck, my arms, like, you know, like hairs stand up. I start sweating in places that are uncomfortable whenever I hear CISOs that start talking threats and vulnerabilities and understanding what those things are. I get really excited. And I think it's difficult for organizations to hire CISOs. And this is the crux, I think, of the problem. The people that are hiring CISOs are boards of directors. They're the C-Os. They are not eggheads, right? So it's very, very difficult to find somebody that can penetrate into that organization that's hiring them and still be a really good technical person. So it is absolutely a mix of understanding business, because you got to get the job, and all the people that you're interviewing with, they get business, but also understanding the technical components makes it a uniquely difficult job in the industry.
So, okay, to distill it down, let's make a quick bullet point guide for, so you've been breached and you're a CISO. Step 1, minimize the breach. Distract. Step 2, distract. Name other companies that have been breached and see if you can, you know, get the interviewer to talk about them instead of your company. Step 3, throw in the words nation state and imply that you're being targeted by nation state actors, because as we know, that's a get out of jail free card. You can't defend against them, so there's nothing you can do. And step 4 is plug your new product and how you're doing better. And then
did they do that in this article?
I don't know.
List that step?
I may have ad-libbed at the end.
Okay.
But I will say the implication throughout the article, the implication is we at Okta will keep you safe. That's like the vibe, which is not really their role, but in some ways it kind of is. But like,
so let's take a step back for a second. I agree with everything you guys are saying. Maybe he shouldn't have been the person on the front lines addressing it. Most of the time, when we talk about incident response, we talk about a communications team. And I hear you chomping at the bit there, John.
Okay. I just want to say one thing. I want to make it very clear before we go any further. It came across as sarcastic, and a little bit it was. This was masterclass. I am not bullshitting.
I agree.
His interview on Recorded Future was top notch. And every CISO needs to look at how to do it that way. I'm not kidding. This is not sarcasm, even though I'm very jaded and salty at the moment. It was really solid. So go ahead, continue.
Well, it was solid. And when we see a news release like this or a conversation or interview, who's the target audience? A target audience of Corey is much different than a target audience of a person who focuses on compliance, or even target audience of potential customers. So I think we also have to take that perspective in mind. We were at RSA, it's where we talk about vendors, we consider vendors, and he's got to somewhat preserve or uphold his company's vision and reputation without out and out lying. So no offense, the highly technical person may not have been the target audience for that interview.
But even the tech that he did drop in that interview was still impressive. I think Corey mentioned it too.
Yeah, I would say the technical person is definitely the target. It's the Recorded Future podcast. I would guess if your job title includes C or O or any other like executive term, I don't think you know what Recorded Future is or have ever heard of that. That's like tech people only. So I think it's kind of, like to kind of break the fourth wall a little bit, we're right now doing PR for a company that tends to market from the bottom up of, technical people, right? Like we're a company that tends not to go after chief executives, but to go after like trying to train and help the people who are actually doing the work in organizations. And I'm assuming Okta does some of that too, right? They want to target like when the chief security officer goes to the identity team at a company and says, "Hey y'all, we need a new identity solution. What should we use?" If they say, "Don't use Okta, they got breached, they suck," like that's going to kill the project. That's going to kill the deal.
Yeah, but even with what happened with Okta, I would never tell our customers don't use Okta, right? Like that's insane. So yeah, like I said, I think that I do get frustrated with kind of the double speak, but like I said, this was a very good interview. I think by me critiquing it, and I don't want it to come across by me critiquing it by saying, "Hey, look, he called out Microsoft, he called out Cisco." I think that's all good. Like, I think that that's exactly what his role in that interview should have been, and he did a fantastic job of it.
Yeah, you could argue, like, if a customer asked me, should we use Okta because we saw they got breached, how should we react? My answer would basically be, well, they're in the unique position of having been hit by the same attacks that you're going to be hit by that are going to target the same tools that you are going to use. And so, and I can tell you from the technical perspective, I'm sure Michael can speak to this too, but Okta has evolved quite a bit from the technical side, including, adding, like back in the day, it used to be like just implementing sub-resource integrity, implementing basic session fingerprinting and things like that. They've also added lots of unique identifiers. They've made this hard for us. They've made it harder for us. And there's also, not to like victim blame or whatever, but at the end of the day, that button that says reset all MFA factors being present in Okta is not really their fault. It's the fault of the people that configured that to roll out to their entire IT team. Right now, we're more aware of that. You shouldn't do that. That wasn't really the guidance before. It was kind of like more priority on usability over security. But I do think like using a company that has been personally impacted by this, or, corporate impacted by this, will probably lead to better outcomes because they're now thinking, what controls can we put in place so that our IT, not only our team internally, but also our customers' teams can see, who's resetting what, why are they resetting it, have an approval process in place, looking at session fingerprinting and things like that. Like, that's my logic. It's always about how they react. And like, while we can make fun of them for initially being like, oh, it's actually 0%. And then, oh no, it's 100. That's not great. But at the same time, they know what it feels like. And, it happens to their customers all the time too, right? A lot of these ransomware targets this year have been Okta specific customers, not because Okta sucks, but because they have a huge market share. So it's just like, yes, identity is going to continue to be a threat. It's not. Yeah,
well, they don't just.
Hold on. I want to give Kelly the last word on this, and then we got to move on. But I have a question that's been burning, and I've seen it happen, and I want to get Kelly's take on it, and then anybody else. All right, you're a tech person, and you're going to move into a CISO role. How the hell do you develop the skills? Like, just set the technology on the side at the table. How do you develop the skills so you can actually speak the business in such a way that you can get that job and you can adequately communicate the technology? Because right now, like, these two things don't touch very often. And a lot of times when I do talk to fantastic CISOs, a lot of times they're incredibly stressed out, trying to balance that universe of those two things. And this is something that ultimately has to change. So Kelly, I wanted to give you first word on this, and then I think Bronwyn wanted to say something, and then we've got to close this one out. CISO training, Jeff just said.
I like that, Jeff.
Process. All right, go ahead.
The most successful CISOs that I've seen are technologists who have built relationships up the stack. They've taken the time to learn application development, networking, identity management, and as they've progressed in their career, they've kept those relationships with people in different technology stacks. And you can always learn more about business if you pursue an MBA, you talk to small business owners. But to your point, there is value in a CISO being very technical.
And then Bronwyn, you were going to say something too?
Yeah, I agree completely with what Kelly said, but also there's the component of being able to communicate clearly. And one of the things that I see over and over again is incredibly intelligent people who have deep understanding, but can't break it down into normal English. And actually, I would kind of suggest something like Toastmasters. Learn public speaking. I mean, you said that this interview was a masterclass. How many highly technical people do we know who cannot speak in an interview clearly?
Well, but also organizations that'll allow them to speak.
Exactly.
Lawyers clearly let him speak, and he did a great job. So,
I
well,
mean,
they wouldn't have if he hadn't proven that he could.
Yeah,
they would have kept that gate closed.
Yeah.
So it's about learning to speak. And I mean, we use dumb it down a lot when we're talking about explaining technical issues to non-technical people. And I think that's a disservice because it reinforces this we're better than you attitude. And it's not that. We have a different understanding than they do. They have different priorities than we do. And it's about finding that common ground. And it's about making sure that we help them understand, okay, yes, this is badness. This is why you should care. And these are the things, and again, that dialogue, we have to have a better understanding of what the business priorities are, and then be able to help us spin what we present to meet those priorities.
If anyone's curious, just to close the loop real quick, the David Bradbury, the CSO at Okta, he had a technical role last in 2004, and since then he's been information security officer, information risk director, VP of information security. So you got to give him credit at least a little bit. His career for the last, however many years that is, 20 years has been non-technical, and he's managed to stay at least somewhat relevant. And I think that's the struggle as you enter leadership, is staying relevant, like being able to understand, like, what are they doing with cookies? Are they salted caramel? I'm confused. That's I think one of the keys too, is to be able to, quickly, okay, what is this cookie thing? It's not chocolate chip. It's not salted caramel. It's actually, the browser authentication thing, and then be able to explain it in a podcast. That's, I would say, harder than being like, hey, the SEC called. What do we do? But yeah,
I would like to throw one last thing out before we close, and that is learning argumentation. How to present an argument, how to support your argument. And if you want a masterclass in a very appetizing package. Check out the movie Thank You for Smoking.
Yep.
I'm just going to drop it there. Check it out. Thank You for Smoking. Wonderful masterclass about spin.
All right.
All right.
Do we want to talk about the FBI emails?
We gotta. It's legally required. 3-letter orgs. That's like kind of that's one of our hashtags. You didn't know that?
Yeah. Corey, do you want to talk? You want to kick this one off, or do you want me to?
You got it, man. I don't know anything about the FBI.
All right. So one of the there was an email that was leaked. Paula Bates' email was reportedly sent on April 20th, and basically was telling employees and agents in the FBI that it said, I urge everyone to continue to look for ways to appropriately use U.S. person queries to advance the mission, with the added confidence that this new pre-approval requirement will help ensure that those queries are fully compliant with the law. And this is one of those areas that somebody said, fantastic. Oh no, fantastic movie. I read it as fantastic move. Great recommendation. I thought there was some sort of
great recommendation.
Going on.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
And the FBI has been in damage control from this. And basically they're basically saying, I got to see. When asked to explain this, the FBI spokesperson told the headline suggested the deputy urges the use of warrantless wiretaps on U.S. soil, which would be illegal. The top FBI official urges the use of warrantless wiretaps on U.S. soil. The article itself does not say the FBI instructed employees to violate the law or FBI policies, but clarifies that under the surveillance program, at least one of the recipients, the individual targeted, must be a foreigner who's reasonably believed to be somewhere other than on U.S. soil. Good luck, FBI. I don't know how you spin this. I guess this is kind of the counterpoint to the Okta one. They haven't handled this well.
Yeah.
And
I mean, to be fair, it is literally their job. Their job is, well, okay, that's true. But I guess it's like their job is to to follow the law as vaguely as they possibly can, right? Like that's like, I don't know, who would be surprised by this, right? It's like this is like the equivalent of Jeff Bezos's leaked email that says we got to figure out better tax evasion. I can't afford this. Like, yes. I don't know. It's like, oh, shocker. The rich are trying to avoid taxes. Like, yes, of course the FBI is trying to, a little loophole there, a little loophole
Corey,
there. And I don't know.
I got a different perspective on this.
Oh,
I think this was planned because
the conspiracies come out.
Oh, no, not conspiracies. This is, I think what makes this juicy is we use big scary words like surveillance and wiretapping and that sort of thing. We are piquing Americans' interest in privacy. And let me remind you that there's a new federal proposed privacy law. This was done purposely to get people to pay attention to their privacy. That's my 2 cents on it.
That is really optimistic.
So is this like the Supreme Court leak before they killed Roe?
No. This is so optimistic. My saltiness is like broken at this point.
Yay!
We dissolved John Salt in a sea of tears. Good job.
Yeah, I just with all of this, like I could, like, if I was going to put my conspiracy hat on, I got my tinfoil hat, can't get my brains cookies hijacked by the CBIA. This doesn't scare me nearly as much as the United States government basically buying stuff from data brokers. And I strongly believe that is a problem that we haven't started talking about as much as we should. And it's a much greater problem. And I don't believe that there's an easy way to solve that problem, right? So if you're looking at like data brokers, there's people that are collecting tons of information about you all the way down to the location of where your car is with like red light cameras and parking garages and all these things. Like you can literally track the pattern of life of almost any American citizen in a moderate sized country for $5. Like that's it. And there's been a lot of talk in law enforcement lately. They're like, yeah, well, we can't have the satellites going over the United States pulling down cell phone information, but we can sure as hell buy that cell phone information as a data broker. And I don't see why this is still something that we're talking about, because this other issue seems to scare me far more. So if I was going to agree with Kelly, part of me would be like, yeah, let's leak this so people are still talking about surveillance and FISA courts and communicating with people in foreign countries and the logistics of all that, when we're just going to start scooping up everything we can get from data brokers and just having massive contracts. And then it's not illegal for us to do it because somebody else already did it and we just bought it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
But I think, John, that's a great segue to one of our articles about the state of Maryland's privacy law. And in it, so this law is a little bit different than some of the other privacy laws that we've been looking at. This law specifically prohibits selling sensitive data. And it's one of the first privacy laws that calls that out. So
Nice.
I'm still going to take optimism for 100, Alex, on this and say your concern about government scooping up or vacuuming up data is still out there, but at least the state of Maryland is starting to look at, let's not sell sensitive data.
How are they defining sensitive data? And are they talking about data that state of Maryland has that they don't want to sell, or are they trying to make it so vendors can't sell? I missed this article that the vendors can't sell sensitive data.
It's more about anybody in the state of Maryland selling sensitive data, but it's focused on vendors. So the law was passed. It will go into effect in October of 2025. What they're looking at is a couple angles here. First of all, they're targeting businesses that control or process personal data of more than 35,000 people.
Okay.
Or they're looking at organizations that derive revenue from selling data to 100,000 or more customers. So they're targeting it both ways, processing data as well as selling data.
So it's almost like they're putting HIPAA level protections around a lot of this data around individuals, which I think would really solve a lot of the problems of, like, your browsing history and all that would be considered like PII, PHI, and could not be sold. That would help. But it seems like they're almost taking that step, or is that incorrect?
No, I think you're right. The other thing that they've introduced into this law is a universal opt-out mechanism. And for those of you who have tried to opt out of many things, it gets hard. It gets tedious. And so at this point, they're saying, as part of the legislation, provide a universal opt-out mechanism for customers. So if it's a browser extension or however the technology implements itself, or with people, make it easier for customers to get out of the business of being sold and the data about them.
So you're saying that Maryland is trying to complete the ban TikTok speed run any % world record?
That is really something else.
I mean, that's basically what this is, right? I mean, all of this stuff, like, I don't know. I mean, the article also talks about the Maryland Age Appropriate Design Code Act, which sounds like something that, someone in Footloose would have written for their kids about dancing. But anyway, it's just like saying you can't, it actually reduces or restricts the usage of auto-playing media, rewarding users for spending more time on their platform, and spamming users with notifications. Last time I checked, that's just every app. Like,
is that
like,
is that the kid bill specifically, Corey,
Yeah.
or is that the privacy law?
That's the Maryland Kids Code. That's the one that's like the next in line, I guess. So that actually hasn't been signed into law yet, but
You're
it
right.
would go into effect sooner, though.
I see your point about, that is basically what we do for fun on the internet. But I think they're trying to eat the elephant one bite at a time and focus on kids. And if you're not familiar, there's a guy by the name of Jonathan Haidt who's come out with a book that talks about cell phones and how we've got this loss of attention when it comes to especially teenagers. And it's called the anxious generation. And I'll put it in the Discord channel, but it's a very fascinating research project on how cell phones and the always on, always available internet are impacting kids' relationships, focus levels, and interpersonal skills. And that's probably not where you were going with this, Corey, but I thought I would drop it in there anyway.
I wasn't going anywhere. It's
I'm
talking
writing it
about
down.
news. We don't go places or do things. We just amble around and
we just arrive.
We just arrive. That's right. We Kool-Aid man every article. That's the rule. All right, what's next?
I think
I want to talk about. Okay, do you want to do one? Can we do one quick one?
Do one more. Let's do one more.
All right. I want to talk about hackers targeting the children of corporate executives. Since we already deep dived on the CISO thing, we just talked about also kid apps and kid privacy online and stuff like that. So while we're here, let's talk about ransomware. Essentially, this is an article from Business Insider saying, ransomware attackers are targeting children's phones to extort big companies. Basically, I can't believe I'm reading this in a news article, but it says, as companies improve defenses, attackers are becoming more creative. And I think this partially comes from Mandiant's CTO, who said, attackers won't hold back, which is absolutely true. So apparently the attack, to get into the specifics, is SIM swap a chief executive's kid and then try to use that SIM swap to convince the chief to do something bad. I mean, I guess I'd love to.
Do they mention in there anywhere if they had seen any success of this? Because this sounds like a pretty terrible attack to me. Like you could spoof their number if you didn't SIM swap, but either way, they're just making a call from the child's phone number and then talking to the parent to try and get them to install ransomware on their.
Well, I'm guessing it would be text based. It would probably be like, "Hey, I need your code. I need your code to get into blah blah blah." And I will say,
down in the article, it says, "Think about the psychological dilemma that the executive goes through, seeing a phone call from the children, picking up the phone, and hearing that it's somebody else's voice."
Yeah,
So I'd like to.
This does not seem effective.
I am so confused.
So to give John and everyone else a little bit more context, this all came from a talk given at RSA by the CTO of Mandiant. So it might have been a little bit shock factor for the talk, and
yeah, it seems a little contrived.
I'm going with Michael on this. What I haven't seen any incidents. I mean, and I'm sure it's happened. Right? I'm absolutely sure that it's happened somewhere because there's a lot of people on the planet. But to say that this is I just don't see how it would work. Work with me on this. It's okay, I get a text from my kid saying, "Dad, I need your 2-factor authentication code sent to me through your Okta portal." It's yeah, I'm going to call my son, right? Somebody calls me from my son's phone. I'm going to go, I'm probably going to hang up and try to call my son back or try to get a hold. I'm not going to be well, I better give this guy my user ID and password and my cookies, I guess. I'm trying to figure out how this would work. Because, by the way, we aren't ever going to use this in continuous pen testing. I just don't see, we're probably going to have people asking for it. We're probably going to get customers that are going to be
hold on.
Hey, I saw it RSA. Could you target my kids?
John, hold on. We will use it if the client says their crown jewels are the PIN code to get into the locker at hockey practice because I am lost and I need your credit card number.
Ooh.
Okay. The credit card number is getting a little bit closer, right?
But even that, what client is yeah,
I need a college payment. Can I get the credit card? I actually have that text conversation on my phone.
Yeah.
And the answer was no. Call me.
Well, John, clearly you're not an effective executive yet. You got to be handing that stuff out to anyone that texts you.
I realized
I've been buying Amazon gift cards this whole time.
I realized last week just how far I am from being so.
No,
all right, let's wrap it up on that note. Yeah. That was awful.
I think that's just that's like the Van Eck freaking of modern social engineering attacks. It's
exactly.
Cool.
Exactly.
But anyway.
All right. I want to kill this day with fire. It's been a long one. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and listening. We greatly appreciate it. And with that, Ryan, bring out the finger.